This is Tar Heel Talk, an in-depth look at the issues and people making news in North Carolina. Here's your host, Sonia Williams.
March is Women's History Month, and today's show focuses on events and exhibits at the North Carolina Museum of History. And joining me now is Raylana Poteet. She is the curator of political and social history with the museum. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
And this is a wonderful time to kind of celebrate the work of women over the years throughout North Carolina. And I know that there is a fashion exhibit that will kind of take us through the decades of fashion here in North Carolina.
Yes, we have an exhibit that's up through June 3rd at the museum, and it's called The Shape of Fashion, and it basically starts very early and goes through and shows how women's fashion has gone from a straight up and down to huge skirts to bottoms poking out to big sleeves. Just goes through the whole gamut of fashion from about the early 1800s through the 1960s.
Okay, and you've brought along some photographs that really show.
It's no fun to talk about dresses if you don't get to see them.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's take a look at some of those, and you can kind of walk us through.
Well, the first one I brought to show is from the late 1850s, early 1860s. So the exhibit itself starts a little bit earlier with the beginning of the 1800s, when it's very much a straight up and down look. But then over time, the skirts tend to get a little bit bigger and puffier, and this is where we're at peak skirt, is around the 1860s. You have a hoop under here. They called them cage crinolines, which was basically strips of metal that go underneath, and they're circling out concentric circles to keep that dress all poofed out. This was worn in Edgecombe County, and it's a beautiful ball gown. It actually has a separate bodice or top part that you can wear during the day that has long sleeves. It's a little more modest. So this is the kind of thing that obviously only wealthy North Carolina women would have been wearing at the time. Right. This is jumping forward a decade or so. As that skirt gets really, really big, it then starts moving towards the back, and we hit the bustle period in the 1870s and 80s. So we can't see the back of this dress, but it's sort of a gentle slope. It's when you start getting a little bit of big backside to the dresses. Very frilly, lots of stuff going on. And then this is about 10 years later. That bustle is sticking straight out by that point. They called it the shelf in the back. You literally could sit something on the top and it might not fall off. But that bustle look is achieved, as are many of the looks with women over time, before we get into the period when women are really going into the workplace at the end of the 1900s, early 20th century is when the clothing gets less restrictive. But right now, that's clearly not something that you're going to be working outside in, or really women aren't doing office jobs or anything. So their clothing is contorting their body. The fashionable look, you have to have something underneath, like this bustle. That's what's going to make that big shape in the back. It's actually collapsible, so you can sit. You do have to sort of sit carefully while you're doing it, but women are either being squeezed by their corsets, or they've got the hoop to puff out the skirts. Here's a great example of a corset. This one is from the 1880s, so it's the same period as that purple dress. And we look at corsets and go, oh my gosh, how could they wear them? It must have been terrible. There were very few people that laced them very tightly. It was more of a support garment. It was the understructure garment that you were used to wearing. You didn't go, oh, it's terrible. But the great thing is, starting in the 1850s, you can see those metal pieces coming down the front. Those were where you could put it on and off yourself. Before that, it was tightened in the back, had to be unlaced every time you put it on and off. So this is actually a step forward for women, because you can dress yourself much easier. If you were wealthy, you still might have had a maid helping you, but this was a way that you could actually take your undergarments on and off yourself. So if you think about that, that's a crazy thought, that before then, you really, especially wealthy women, needed somebody to help them get in and out of their clothes, which is also going to restrict what women can do, the kinds of jobs they're going to have. That's kind of a big thing. If you're going to go into the office in the morning, you need to be able to dress yourself fairly quickly.
That would be important.
The period that comes after that, in the 1890s, is when we get these big sleeves. Sort of like we have the shoulder pads in the 1980s. I like to think of this as women are starting to get a little bit more empowerment at this time. They are entering office jobs. They're actually getting to do athletic things. So these big sleeves were very popular at the time. Your tennis outfit had those big sleeves. Your biking outfit had those big sleeves, but you were playing tennis and going biking, so that was a big step forward. This obviously is not the dress you were doing that in. This is still a very fancy dress. This is more typical of what women would have been wearing if you were working in an office, if you were a teacher, if you were doing any of the jobs that women were starting to do around the turn of the century. This is just what was called a shirtwaist, the blouse there. Would have been worn usually fairly simple with a fairly simple skirt, and that allowed you a lot more freedom when you're coming and going, when you're dressing yourself. And it's just got, it's, a nice crisp look to it that is very competent, and it's sort of pairing with that idea of women being out in public more often, being in the workforce and moving forward as far as that goes. Now this is what you would have been wearing still if you were the fancy, this is a very high-end dress. Beautiful dress. This is actually, you can't tell in this detail, but it's hand-painted silk, very frothy and lovely. And this look was actually called the S-curve look, or the pigeon front look, because you're wearing a corset that's pushing your bust out and thrusting the hips back, making sort of an S shape out of the dress. But that is the last time that women are really being contorted by their corsets, or that, they don't have anything sticking out, they're not pushing in, they're not puffing out. And after that, we hit the 20s, which is when everybody thinks of the flapper women and very much being free and easy. So this is a mid-1920s. People also think of flapper dresses being really short, but they never actually got above the knee. That's more of a 1960s thing.
Okay.
So a little bit short is still a big deal back then, and showing some calf is a big deal, but they're not quite as freewheeling as we think of them today, maybe. But this is a look that is completely different than anything that's come before. You're not trying to look feminine in it. You really wanted to be thin, skinny, and androgynous looking. You weren't trying to have curves in this. Okay. This is jumping forward to the 1940s. This suit, if you were to compare it to a suit that was worn by a woman in the military, it would look very similar. The military fashion influenced all the other women's clothing. So, very plain, nice, so if I can say it, shoulder pads, and just a very crisp military look that's going on in the 1940s. And then the final dress that I brought to show you is this one from the 1960s. And so this is when you get sleeveless. This is when you get actually very short, all the way up to mini and micro mini skirts. And the exhibit ends with this period because before then, every look or every time period has a very distinct look. You can look at that dress with the big sleeves and go, that's 1890s, and everybody had big sleeves in the 1890s. By the time you get to the 60s and 70s, women might be wearing pants, they might have a trouser outfit, they might have a maxi skirt, they might have a mini skirt. Today, if you look, our trends are much more, what is it made out, what fabric is it made out of, what color or print does it have, much more so than everybody's wearing the exact same shape. They're all trying to make their bodies do this or that, or with the, it's much more individual today, so that concept of being able to really pinpoint a time is done a little bit differently now based on what things are made out of rather than the shape that they have. And that's indicative of the fact that women are now operating as equals in society, and there's not this concept of their bodies needing to be contorted into different fashionable shapes.
Right, and this is going to be on display until June?
June 3rd is when it closes, yes. Right. It's in the lobby level, so it's very easy to come in and take a look at. We've got a couple of fun cutouts where you can put your face in and be on the body of a 1860s dress or a 1900s dress. And there's a couple of cool videos where you can see we've got women dressing in reproduction clothing, so you can see what it was like to put that corset on or to put the hoops on or the bustle on. And it's modern women sort of moving around in the clothing, giving you an idea of what it might have felt like.
Right, so. Sounds like a lot of fun. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, our pleasure. Thank you.
We'll be back with more on Women's History Month after these messages. As we recognize Women's History Month, we're looking at events and exhibits at the North Carolina Museum of History. And joining me now is Sally Bloom with the Longleaf Film Festival Director. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me today. I'm really excited to be here and share with you some information about the art and craft of filmmaking in North Carolina. North Carolina has a really long history of filmmaking. It goes back over 100 years. More than probably 3,000 to 5,000 films have been made in this state. in that time period. The earliest film we know about is The Heart of Esmeralda, that we know of was filmed in 1913 in Bat Cave, North Carolina. But by the 1920s, films were being made for more than entertainment purposes, education, promotion, travel, all kinds of things. And one particular film in North Carolina was women written, produced, and directed in 1921, which was fairly unusual in the time period.
Absolutely.
And it was an educational film, and it was about the lost colony. It has a really long name that I'm not going to bore you with today. I think we have an image of the one who wrote it. Mabel Evans is going to come up, and she was the superintendent of education in Dare County, which is where she is, Mabel Evans-Jones. And so she was the superintendent of education. She worked very hard to have the first film, educational film made in the state about the lost colony, and she hired a woman director, Elizabeth Gimbel, and I think we have an image of her as well. And there she is out on the coast. And then we also have another image of them filming. And this was done at the Outer Banks near the site of Lost Colony. Local residents acted in it, made their own costumes, really came together as a community to make this film. 4 copies of it were made. It premiered here in Raleigh at the old Supreme Court with the governor in presence. And when the film would travel around the state, sometimes they would have to take a Model T with them to use as a generator to run the projector, which I think is really amazing story, an early film. So over time in North Carolina, women weren't always necessarily the director, but they definitely have been participating in film as actors in production units, set designers, set decorators, costumes, wardrobe, all aspects of filmmaking. More recently, the explosion of women filmmakers is tremendous with the independent film community, which is where Longleaf comes in. Longleaf is a film festival for independent film. There are many film festivals in North Carolina, and I want to share with you, Longleaf is in year 4 right now. In our first 3 years, we screened almost 50 films made by women. So we have some movie posters just a few that I have to share with you. There's Longleaf right there with our dates up. I hope everybody comes to see us, May 11th and 12th. And let's take a look at some of these films. So this is a poster from Elizabeth Haviland James' film. It's called In So Many Words, and it's about Lucy Daniels of the Daniels family. It's a documentary, very evocative, beautiful, lyrical film. It's a film we screened. Another film, another documentary, is called Brewconomy by Camden Watts, and it was one of the first films that came out about the North Carolina beer industry, the craft beer, revolution that's been going on here for a while. Keepsake is a narrative short written by Meredith Sauce. She performs in it as well. She's a musician and actor. She lives over in Chapel Hill. This is a hilarious, delightful, funny film about 2 sisters cleaning out their mother's home after she passes, and she was a hoarder. Few surprises come about when they go through her house. Another narrative film, Ghost Image. Katie Damon was a filmmaker out in LA. She ended up in Asheville, is making films there, and this is quite a fun film with a surprising twist every time she takes a photo.
Oh. And these are all done by women?
These are all women filmmakers, every single one of them. This is another documentary, an amazing film, Soul City, which was an actual place in North Carolina and Warren County that Floyd McKissick started after the Civil Rights Movement. He was trying to create a community where everybody could live in harmony. 3 women are involved in this, Monica Berra, Shiree Del Sol, and Jenny Richards. Really cool film. And the last poster, this is just one of my favorite images. This is another documentary about a little boy in Durham. It's called In This World. The director is Kelly Creedon, and he is a boy who is determined that he's a triple threat. He can act, sing, perform, dance, and he is going to put on a talent show to show the world that. And this is a documentary about him trying to put on that talent show, and it is heartbreaking and heartwarming at the same time. So those are a few of the films that we've screened at Longleaf by women filmmakers.
And this year's screening will take place in May? Is that right?
Yeah, every year our festival's in May. Longleaf screens juried films. We're a juried event, narratives and documentaries, May 11 and 12. We are free to attend. So we really invite people to come out. We have free panels and workshops, free popcorn. We're going to have Movie Under the Stars. We have parties, wrap party, all kinds of events. So we hope you and everybody else will come join us for that. And as a matter of fact, I want to share with you, I got to get you in the mood. We got some swag for you.
I love
got a
that.
Longleaf Film Festival tee for you.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So definitely wear this to the event.
Yes.
And if someone wanted to submit a screening, a film to be screened, how can they do that?
Yeah, well, submissions for this year have ended. They ended March 1, but we'll start up back again in July through Film Freeway. Longleaf Film Festival is a program of the North Carolina Museum of History. We have a website, longleaffilmfestival.com. But the films are right now are with the judges. So we're going to be announcing our official selections in a live streaming event on April 13th.
Wow. And so, again, the website, people can go to find out more information about that.
Yeah, it's longleaffilmfestival.com, or you can get through us through the museum website as well.
And that's ncmuseumofhistory.org.
That's right. We are a program at the museum. There are 3 places there where we screen films, so we can screen dozens of films in just a couple of days.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. It sounds like an exciting time, an exciting event that'll be coming up in May. And thank you so much for being here and sharing it with us.
I appreciate it.
And thank you for my swag.
Yeah, good. Thank you so much.
All right. We'll be back with more Tar Heel Talk after these messages. Welcome back to Tar Heel Talk. I'm Sonia Williams. March is Women's History Month, and today's show focuses on events and exhibits at the North Carolina Museum of History. Joining us now is Diana Bell Kite, Associate Curator with the North Carolina Museum of History. Diana, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we've been talking about some of the exhibits, things that are on display at the Museum of History. Quilts is one of those that is in the works right now.
Yes, we will actually be opening a quilt exhibit next year in 2019. So we're in the very early planning stages right now, but it's been a lot of fun going through our quilt collection and learning about all the stories that our quilts tell.
I was going to say, they tell a lot of stories. I know that having people in my family who make quilts, they take a lot of time, and usually there's a lot of love that goes into making them. So tell us about some of the items that are going to be on display.
Okay, well, I have a few images that I brought today to talk about the stories of those quilts.
Okay.
This first one here was made about 1850 by a woman named Caroline Johnson Owen. She was from Sampson County. And this is often referred to as a snowball quilt. And this one is one of the earlier quilts that Caroline Johnson Owen made. We have a photo of her as well. There she is, somewhat later in life after she made the quilt. But she made this brown and white snowball quilt before her wedding because she put her maiden name initials on the back of the quilt, so we know it was before her marriage. She married a Methodist minister, and she made multiple other quilts in her life, and you can tell looking at the stitching on this one compared to those later ones. This was one of her earlier works, so she was still building those skills that she would be applying to the other quilts she was making later in life.
Okay.
And then we're going to skip forward in time a little bit. This is a string star quilt made by Eliza Arrington, who lived right here in Wake County. She lived in Cary, and there she is. And this is a quilt that comes with great stories passed down through her family. She and her husband were landowning cotton farmers in Cary, or in the vicinity of Cary. And they were very proud to be landowners during a time period when a lot of people, and especially African American families, worked as sharecroppers or as tenant farmers on other people's land. And so she was very proud of that, also very proud of her quilt making. And her children passed down stories to the museum when they donated this quilt, that she would often sit and she would do lap quilting is what she preferred. And she would talk to her children while she was doing the quilting and give them advice for the future about how important it was to get an education and how they should save their money, and just a lot of sort of life lesson type advice, and that she would always be very proud when she finished a quilt. And her daughters would play a game because she would make the quilts out of the scraps left over from making their dresses, and also from feed sacks, like a lot of people during the 1930s when this quilt was made. And so they would go and look at the new quilt she had completed and say, oh, that's my dress, that's your dress, that's the pig sack, picking out recognizable fabrics. And we have one more quilt here, and this one is quite unusual. This was made by a woman named Emily Maxwell from Watauga County in the mountains. And she was a deeply religious woman. And she was very, very staunchly opposed to tobacco use, to alcohol consumption, and later in her life, she also frowned very much upon caffeine. And so she gave up drinking coffee and would just have a cup of hot water every morning because she was very opposed to caffeine. And she also believed that she had conversations with God. And late in her life, she had a vision of heaven that she believed was sent to her by God, and that it was her instruction to make that vision into a quilt. So she made this quilt in 1952, and on it she depicted this vision of heaven that she had seen. And in the bottom corner, she put a big HV for Heavenly Vision, because this is her Heavenly Vision quilt.
Yeah, I was wondering what the HV
Heavenly Vision
stood for. Very beautiful.
Yeah.
Took a lot of intricate work to do that.
All of them did. And these are just a few of the many, many stories we're going to be telling through the quilt exhibit that'll be opening in 2019.
And it's neat to have not only these stories and the quilts, but have them come from different parts of the state. So they're not just here in Raleigh. So you get more of a flavor of what North Carolina statewide is really all about in our history.
Definitely. We want to, in the quilt exhibit, show a real variety geographically, time period-wise, ethnicities of the makers, because quilting really was practiced by people all over the state from all different backgrounds, and so it's a really interesting way, an interesting window into women's lives.
How can people make a donation to this exhibit?
Well, the exhibit's going to be based on our existing collection. We have a very large collection of historic quilts, but we do accept donations, and the information is on our website for contacting curators.
Okay, and that is, and go to the museum's website, ncmuseumofhistory.org.
That's right.
And find out more information.
Exactly.
When you look at all of the exhibits and things that are going on at the Museum of History here in North Carolina, what are some of the stories that you want our viewers to take away, or visitors to the museum to take away from their visits?
We want them to take away that this is their history, and we hope that they come and they see their faces reflected in the history of the state, and their stories and the stories of people who came before them in North Carolina.
And I know that you have a lot of school groups who will come and visit as well.
We do. We do. We have, I think about a quarter of our visitation is school groups, especially 4th and 8th graders who study North Carolina history.
Right, exactly. What are some other events that are in the works? I know this exhibit won't be ready until next year, but I know that you've got a lot of other things going on at the museum all the time.
Well, I would again direct people to our website. Just thinking of a few things, we have the film festival coming up in May. And every year we have our largest festivals, which are our American Indian Heritage Celebration and African American Cultural Celebration. Those are in November and January. And then during the summer as well, we have summer camps for school-aged children. So all of the details for those are on our website.
There's a lot going on at the North
always.
Carolina Museum of History. When you talked a little bit about some of the large festivals, I know the African American Cultural Festival is something that has been growing every year. I can imagine that's the goal.
Right, to grow within our means for a successful event. We want everyone to have a good time as well. So it has been growing, and we invite everyone to come out and check it out when we have those events.
So you've got lots of events going on, great exhibits that are already up, and then some that are underway. We certainly thank you so much for taking the time to share this information and be our guest today.
Great, thank you for having me.
All right. That's it for this week's Tar Heel Talk. To comment on this or other episodes of the show, like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, or send an email to tarheeltalk@fox50.com. I'm Sonia Williams. Thanks so much for watching. Enjoy your week.